Today in Chapter 7, Section 1, we are going to look at direct variation, inverse variation, and how we can tell the difference between the two looking at tables and equations. Then we'll be writing an equation. Direct variation is much like a linear relationship, whereas x increases, y increases, or as x decreases, y decreases, which means they're both going in the same general direction. You can look at the examples down here. Cans of pop, the more pop you buy, the more money you make. And then they're in the form, the general basic form, y equals a times x, where a is a constant of variation, and it's usually very similar to a slope in a linear equation. Inverse variation is similar, except that in things like this, it's whereas x increases, y decreases, or vice versa, such as what you would earn on a test and the amount of time you spend messing around in class. The more you mess around, the less your grade will be. And in this case, it's in the form y equals a divided by x. So basically, as you can see, the difference between direct and inverse variation is when you have each of them solved for y. In direct, you are multiplying a times x, and inverse, you are dividing a divided by x. As in, direct has the x in the numerator, inverse has the x in the denominator. And sometimes you can also have where it's neither direct nor inverse, and that would just be neither and be a different type of equation that you're looking at. So what we want to do here is tell whether it shows direct, inverse, or neither. First thing we want to do is go ahead and solve the equation for y. So in letter A, we're going to divide x on both sides. So we have y equals 5 divided by x. In this case, we are dividing by x, which means we have inverse variation. The second one, we have y equals x minus 4. That's going to be neither direct nor inverse. And the last one, if we solve both, if we multiply both sides by 2 and we solve for y, we have y equals 2 times x, which means we are multiplying a times x, so that would be direct. Again, here we just have a couple more examples. This one, it's y equals 6, number 1, it's y equals 6 times x. You are multiplying 6 times x, so that would be direct. The second one, when you divide y on both sides, you have y equals negative 0.25 divided by x, which would be inverse. And the last one is y plus x. If you solve for y, you get y equals 10 minus x, which is going to be neither. Okay, so next we're going to look at a table of values, and we're going to look and decide whether it's direct variation, inverse variation, or neither. And what we're looking at is the relationship mostly of A. Okay, it is direct variation if your constant of variation is the same thing as what direct would be y divided by x. Inverse would be y times x. And then if you don't have a constant of variation in the table, then it would be neither. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at these tables and decide if it's direct, inverse, or neither. So we're going to look at is the relationship between x and y. Remember, if it is direct variation, that means that when you divide y divided by x, it's the same thing every time. If it is inverse variation, when you multiply x times y, you get the same thing each time. So as we look, when we divide y divided by x on here, on the first table, we get negative 6, and then we get negative 6 over 4. That's definitely not constant, which means it's not direct variation. If we look and we say, well, what do we get when we say x times y every time? We get negative 24, negative 24, negative 24. 2 times negative 12 is negative 24, 4 times negative 6 is negative 24, and so on, which means this table is an example of inverse variation. If you look at the second one, letter B, we look and we say, is y divided by x the same thing every time? Well, 2 divided by 1 is 2, 4 divided by 2 is 2, 8 divided by 3 is not 2, so it is not direct. Then we're looking to check to see if it's inverse variation. Is x times y the same thing? 2 times 1 is 2. 4 times 2 is 8, which means it's not inverse, which means it's neither. Okay, real quick on this one also, you can check for direct variation by saying y divided by x. If we do y divided by x, 20 divided by -4 is -5. 15 divided by 3 is -5. And as we finish out the table, we get a constant of variation of -5, which means it is an example of direct variation. It is not inverse, because if you multiply 20 times -4, you get 80, or excuse me, -80. 15 times -3 is -45. On the last one, if we divide y divided by x in the table, 60 divided by 1 is 60. 30 divided by 2 is 15, which means it's not direct because you don't get a constant every time. Inverse, if we multiply x times y, 60 times 1 is 60, 30 times 2 is 60, 20 times 3 is 60, and 15 times 4 is 60. So this one is in fact inverse variation. The last thing we're going to do in this section is write an equation when x and y vary inversely. So if we're varying inversely, we're going to be in the form of y equals a divided by x, and they'll give us a value of x and y to figure out what a is, and then we write the equation using that value of a, and then it wants us to evaluate when x is a specific value. So the first thing that we do is we figure out our value of a. And to do that, when things vary inversely, the easiest way to do that is to say that a equals x times y. Because then you notice in this equation, if you solve it for a, multiply both sides by x, you get a equals y times x. So in order to find out a when when y equals 4 and x equals 3, well, different color here. A is going to be x times y, which is 4 times 3. So our value of a is 12. So our equation written in terms of y and x is y equals 12 divided by x. When we write the equation, we always have it in the form of y equals a over x. We just substitute our value for a. And then finally thing that we do, find y when x equals -2. Well, if we use the equation we just wrote, 12 divided by -2, we get y equals -6. Okay, another quick example here. We have x equals 5, y equals -4. So a is going to equal 5 times -4. So a will equal -20. Our equation that we write is y equals -20 over x. And then it says find y when x equals 3. That means we'd say y equals -20 over 3. And we can just leave it as a fraction like that. Okay, we have a couple more examples here. Number 6, x and y are 4 and 5, which means a is going to equal 20. So our equation will be y equals 20 over x. And it says in the directions to find y when x equals 2, y equals 20 over 2, so y equals 10. Same thing, a on number 7 is going to equal -6. So our equation will be y equals -6 over x. And find y when x equals 2. Y equals -6 over 2. So y would equal -3. On the last one, has a fraction in there. Our a is going to be 1/2 times 16. So a, half of 16 is 8. So our equation is y equals 8 over x. And then when x equals 2, y equals 8 over 2. 8 over 2. And y would equal 4. Good luck.